Welcome to End of Life University on YouTube. Today I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Dr. Matthew Tyler, who is the founder of How to Train Your Doctor, a website, but also an Instagram channel and a YouTube channel. And you can check out all of his short videos on Instagram if you'd like. But stay tuned for our conversation where we talk all about his work in palliative care and why he started creating a social media presence. So make sure you have subscribed to this channel down below. Also subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you happen to listen to the podcast. Go to eoluniversity.com/support to make a small contribution to help keep this channel and the podcast on the air. And so we'll move on now with my interview with Dr. Matt Tyler. Today, I'm so happy to welcome my guest, Dr. Matthew Tyler. Matt is a board-certified physician in internal medicine as well as hospice and palliative medicine and works full-time as the medical director of palliative care services for his medical system in Illinois. He is the creator of How to Train Your Doctor, a coaching platform designed to help patients and caregivers confidently make medical decisions related to serious illness and end of life. He specializes in creating educational, bite-sized videos that cover a variety of topics related to hospice and palliative medicine. And I'll tell you, that's how I got familiar with Matt's work, is through Instagram and watching his fantastic short videos there on Instagram and also on YouTube. And I'm going to leave links for those in the show notes. But you can find out more at his website, howtotrainyourdoctor.com. So, Matt, thanks so much for taking time out to join me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I always love talking with other physicians who've found their way into this field and are doing work in palliative care and hospice. It's always kind of an interesting path that we follow from medical school to end up here doing this work. At least I didn't feel much support in medical school for going into hospice care when I was there, but that was a long time ago. So I'd love to hear your story and how you ended up being attracted to palliative medicine and hospice.
Sure. Well, and to your point, it wasn't even on my radar at medical school. I was all over the place in medical school. Everything seemed kind of interesting, and it took a while to find my people and where felt I fit in best. I will spare you that winding story, but by the time I picked a specialty, I was an internal medicine resident, and I had assumed maybe I would do GI. Procedures seemed fun, and that was my plan when I started residency. But very quickly into intern year, I realized uh, it was hard to have like real conversations with patients with just the way the work is designed. There was so much, so many boxes to check, kind of going through the motions of, doing your check-in, checking the labs, writing notes. It was very hard to just like sit down and talk to people and figure out what they wanted to do, what was important to them. And it wasn't until I randomly had an elective rotation a few months into intern year with hospice and palliative medicine in particular. And I realized this was the opportunity to have the conversations that I was really craving, for lack of a better word, with my patients, the opportunity to sit down and rather than tell them what we needed them to do, I got to sit down and ask them, what can we do for you? And really just flip the whole narrative around in a way that was the kind of doctor I wanted to be. And it turned out that palliative medicine was the way to do that. And from then on out, that was when I decided, okay, this is what I'm doing, and I set my sights on palliative medicine from there on out. And here I am. I made that decision 12 years ago, and no regrets so far.
Wow, I love hearing that because my path was somewhat similar. I always wanted patient-focused care, patient-centered care. And it was when I became a volunteer in hospice and
Mm.
got to sit at the bedside with patients and their families and realize this richness of having deep conversations with people at this time in their lives. But I came away from that thinking, this is the kind of doctor I always wanted to be. And this is where I can be who I truly am and show up as myself, but do the work that I was meant to do from the start. So yeah, same kind of feeling of I think I found my home and where I belong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's interesting how many of us in this field have had something similar like that of suddenly feeling like this is the perfect fit and where I need to be. And I'm so glad for it because we actually need a lot more people to come into this specialty. I think to face the shortages that we're looking at in the future.
And I think people are catching on. We've reached we're now the fifth largest medical subspecialty, last I heard. So people are catching on to how great the field is.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Well, I was thinking maybe for any listeners out there who aren't clear yet on what palliative care is, maybe you could just start by talking about an overview of palliative care and what kinds of work you do as a palliative care physician.
Yeah. So palliative medicine is a specialty focused on quality of life. And we focus on quality of life for anyone who has been impacted by a serious illness. And our whole goal is to figure out how can we make the journey just a little bit easier on you, whether that's helping with symptom management or helping build some coping skills or just being your liaison to talk to all the different doctors and get a clear message about what's going on so you can make the best decision for yourself. We're really there to help just alleviate some of the stressors of a serious illness.
And the way I look at it is palliative care really fills some of the gaps that in the past were left by other specialties in the excellent work they do toward curative medicine. But have been some gaps for patients not getting all of their needs met. And palliative care really fills in those gaps by being able to talk to patients about quality of life and emotional issues and spiritual issues of dealing with serious illness and helping out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when treatments are, quote, successful, there can be a lot of ripple effect of that treatment on the person, the people around them, whether those are just chronic pains or other chronic symptoms, or the emotional toll of that whole treatment that's left unaddressed, and how it changes your identity and how you relate to the world, the people around you. There's a lot left to do. That's, as you said, it's often been overlooked by traditional modern medicine, but it's still very real to the people living with it, and where palliative medicine steps in to try to address that need that's been overlooked for so long.
Yes, definitely. Well, I still also see people rejecting palliative medicine because it's been associated with hospice, and people sadly reject hospice out of a fear that it has to do with dying. And so I think that's a discussion we also need to have is how they're different and maybe what how did this happen that everyone conflates palliative care and hospice and how do we solve that problem? How do we help people see the differences?
Yes, this is something our field's actively working on. We certainly don't do ourselves any favors because our specialty is called hospice and palliative medicine. So we are linked in some ways, and we've been spending a lot of time and energy trying to clarify that we are similar but different. And one of the most important differences is that palliative care provides all the support that I just described alongside treatments for the illness. Case in point, I have a clinic in our cancer treatment center, and I check in with patients on their symptom management needs, helping them make preparations for the future, see how they're doing, see how they're emotionally doing, how they're psychologically doing, talk to docs for them. I do all that while they get chemo, while they get immunotherapy, blood transfusions. It's all meant to be provided hand in hand. There's no this idea that it's palliative care or treatment is one of the most common misconceptions. Whereas with hospice care, typically hospice care is exclusive to or mutually exclusive to treatments focused on the disease itself. And I think the misnomer with hospice care tends to be this idea that it's treatment or hospice care, when in reality, it's typically we're talking about hospice when treatment's no longer helping all that much in the first place. And it's more a conversation of how do we continue to support you just with a different focus. Uh, and how that is received is often is influenced by how it's communicated, which is what I try to do with my platform is frame these communications in a way that can be more constructive for people to make decisions.
Yeah, and when I think of how helpful palliative care can be for anyone who's facing a serious life-changing illness, it makes me very sad to think people are rejecting it out of fear because they have misconceptions about what it offers or what it's about, and and not understanding as well. Hospice is a similar type of care, but just at the very end of life, and also isn't anything to be afraid of. It's just it's a very important type of care when it's offered. But
Right.
it's we need a lot of help with marketing and branding, I guess, to get the public to understand the differences and to not be afraid of saying yes to palliative care because it could change everything for a person, I think, on as they're navigating a serious illness.
Right. If anyone's dealing with a serious illness like cancer, or dementia, or heart failure, if you're ever thinking, geez, I could really use a little bit more support, then it's definitely worth it to get that initial meeting with palliative care and see what they're all about. It is challenging because there is some variation region to region and what sort of palliative care you have available, whether that's in a clinic or home or a hospital. That's more the nuance can be a little bit tricky. But otherwise, yeah, it's definitely worth reaching out to folks in your area and see what palliative care can do for you.
And because it's not just for the patient, but it's really helpful for the family members as well,
Yeah,
caregivers, other support people, to have a place to go where they can have their questions answered and where they also get the encouragement and support that they need, as they're going on this journey with their loved one.
absolutely. Whenever anyone asks me, what should I talk to someone from palliative care? I always recommend people go to the website getpalliativecare.org and type in your zip code and see what's around, see you have to square it all with insurance. It's the same insurance rules as any medical specialty, but yeah, I think you have a lot more to gain than lose by at least having that first meeting with the palliative care team.
Do you find more specialists are referring to palliative care nowadays?
Overall, yes. I think the culture is changing. I think we are often still fighting the notion that the other specialists need to try everything first before they can refer to us. I think there's an increasing amount of comfort referring to us as options are exhausted. I think we still have some work to do to get those referrals while treatments are being explored, early on in treatment at time of diagnosis. I think in the academic medical centers, this is catching on a little bit quicker than it is in the community hospitals. Uh, and I'm hoping we'll see that trickle down in the years to come as these sort of things happen, usually
Yeah.
play out. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's really important that there's no turf battle here because
right.
we really do different things. And so there doesn't need to be a battle. It's all in support of the patient. And I happen to believe palliative care is actually helpful to patients going through curative treatment. They're likely to do even better if they're getting palliative care and having all their other needs met as well. It's a great augmentation to the treatment they're receiving.
Right. We've had multiple studies now that have shown you get an early palliative care referral and you may end up living longer than if you waited for the palliative care referral, which I think just goes to show a lot of what we do can be difficult to describe sometimes, but the care coordination piece, the symptom management piece, supporting your coping skills, that can go a long way.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your work, like visiting with patients who are in the cancer treatment center. Do you do in hospital visits also and home visits, or what else does your work consist of?
So most of my work these days is hospital based, meaning I'm seeing folks who have been hospitalized for any number of issues related to a serious illness, whether that be an infection because they're immune compromised, they've had a pneumonia, they're not eating or drinking because they're uh, progressing into advanced dementia, or they have a heart failure exacerbation. Um, I'll I'll be asked to check in and assess what they're hearing from the doctors and how they're squaring that against what their priorities are and what their values are, and then making sure that uh, us on the doctor's side are clearly communicating options and what sort of benefits the patients or families can expect from those treatments, and how to best make a decision where there's no clear right or wrong answer necessarily, and it's heavily values and priorities based. But making sure that as we explore those values, we're giving patients a helpful framework to consider that.
Yeah. I was just, I wrote a blog about people who have to make a challenging decision for a loved one, say, who can't
Mhm.
speak to for themselves, and family members who have to make a decision about their care, but there's no advance directive and they have no idea what their loved one might want. In my opinion, a palliative care team could be really helpful in a situation like that to help family members sit down and walk through that process. How do you decide something when you don't know what your loved one wants or how they would feel about it?
Yeah, this is a very common thing that we tackle in the hospital, and I think there's two key components here, and the first is on the medical side, framing our choices so that families can really truly understand the trade-offs they're being asked to make, and making sure that we come to the table with medical options where we can help paint a picture. What does one pathway look like versus the other? Where would I need to live if I did the surgery? Could I ever go home again if I went through the surgery? What does living on dialysis really look like for me? Or or what would this chemo look like in terms of my ability to get around the house on my own and go out and go to dinners with my friends? I think I am often pushing to make sure that we're doing a good job really illustrating what the two options would look like, and their impact on the person's day-to-day life. And once we framed that decision, then we can talk about values. And when we're talking about values in the context of someone who can't speak for themselves, we're talking to a surrogate decision maker, healthcare power of attorney. We'll ask questions like, if your person could be part of this conversation, if they could hear what you're hearing right now, what do you think they'd say about this? How would they feel about this? And and I always emphasize the question phrased that way, what would they say, rather than what would they want? Uh, because in conversations like this, decisions related to a serious illness, it's very hard to get what you would want necessarily. What most people would want would be to be cured or to be better, to go back to normal life. And what we would want isn't necessarily grounded A in reality, and B what choices are in front of us right now. If we ask what people would say, it kind of gets more to how they think, how they weigh bits of information, how they prioritize things. And that could be a helpful thought exercise to come to the right pathway for a person, even if they can't speak for themselves.
And I like that you mentioned the trade-offs involved in making these decisions. That's a really good way to look at it because there's always a trade-off. There's not just one clear path that's all advantage. Either
Yeah.
path is going to have some advantages and some disadvantages, you're so right. It comes down oftentimes to the trade-offs and how we evaluate those.
Yeah, and I think it's worth emphasizing the trade-off piece of this, because this is so often the crux of complicated medical decision making in a serious illness. And getting back to that question of what someone would want, often folks want to live or want to fight or want to get better. And when we frame questions that way, it can be very easy to come to the conclusion that we may as well try the treatment or attempt CPR. If we frame decisions in that way, it can often feel like there's no downside to trying, when there is a trade-off. And we may come to the same conclusion that this person would want to give it everything to try to eke out as many days as possible. But it is important to frame the trade-off that will come at the cost of potentially being able to be at home or be more comfortable. May not come with that much more time at the end of the day. And again, there's a time and place for the personal preferences and priorities, so long as we as doctors are doing our job and doing our diligence, helping people understand what to expect from that choice, and what they're actually giving up, what feels like they're giving up, but maybe not giving up, so they can truly make an informed choice.
Yeah, and I think it's important to emphasize I don't see that doctors or in palliative medicine at least are trying to push patients one direction or another. That a lot of times the discussion is agenda free from the medical side in terms of we just want to help you make the decision that's best for you and your loved one. We're not trying to push you in one way or another. We're helping you explore the options. Would you say that's generally true?
This is one of the specific questions I struggle to address on social media because I think it's a partial truth. I think it depends on the decision at hand. A great example I can give is if we're sitting down with a caregiver for someone with advanced dementia and they're not eating that much anymore, they're losing weight, and now they're in the hospital with an aspiration pneumonia, and we're saying, oh, it's the medical team saying, oh, it's not safe to eat anymore, and now we're sitting down ostensibly to talk about a feeding tube, and we want to get a sense of how badly this person would want to push their body beyond its natural limits. Would they accept artificial nutrition? Would they accept a feeding tube? And it's easy to focus just on the personal preferences and the values there, but it ignores the fact that there is a clear medical recommendation in this situation.
Mm, that's true.
There's a standard of care here that clearly lines out that people who get feeding tubes when it's related to dementia, they don't live longer. There's a lot of complications, and the American Geriatric Society actively recommends against placing them. Um, and that's one of many examples where it's um, trying to navigate that nuance there where, yes, we want to promote choice and integrate values into decisions, but not at the expense of abdicating our responsibilities as physicians to be clear when there is a standard of care, when there medically is a right or wrong option here, but laying that out in a way that's compassionate and recognizes the gravity of this decision, even if it's not necessarily a decision that, even if there is a right or wrong medical answer there, families can feel the weight of the decision all the same, and you have to be
Yeah.
uh, empathetic to that and guide people through that compassionately, not just say, well, it's not recommended, so we're going to move on like that. Can't hand wave it like that, but also we do families a massive disservice when we don't communicate what's medically reasonable and what's not. So that way they don't have to walk away feeling like they didn't push hard enough or try hard
Yeah.
enough.
And
They
that's
can
true.
hold
And
their heads
that's
high. Yeah.
what our expertise allows us
Yeah.
to do
Yeah.
to make those recommendations. And
Yeah.
yeah, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, well, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I love the title of your website and your movement, How to Train Your Doctor, because I think it is perhaps a sad reality that some of us are going to have to train our doctors who may not be as open or aware or as helpful with planning and decision making that we want to go through. And so I just want you to tell us why you named it that and your perspective
Yeah.
on that idea.
Yeah. Well, the title itself is a tip of the hat to the movie How to Train Your Dragon, which I love, and I thought it was catchy, so I went with that. But speaks to the season that we're in as a healthcare system in America in particular, where uh, doctors are up against a lot right now. We are taking care of extraordinarily complex medical situations with no time at all. The administrative demands are higher than ever. And on top of that, really we don't get communication training in medical school. And I get pushback on this sometimes. Maybe there's a medical school here or there that's doing an exemplary job, but for the most part, we get the basics of like how to sound like a human when you're doing a history and physical exam, and maybe we'll get a module on the very bread and butter breaking bad news. But we do not get complex, high stakes communication training like as part and parcel medical school. I'm sorry, I reject anyone that tries to tell me otherwise. Uh, so it's no small thing to try to sit down with a patient and navigate high stakes medical decisions that are very emotionally laden, with no clear right or wrong answer, without the training to do that on top of all those other demands. It's hard. So I always try to clarify as much as I can that I'm not dunking on doctors with the title, but acknowledging the reality is that most doctors are not trained to have these conversations. And that any given doctor has a lot of patients with a variety of communication preferences, and every patient they see has slightly different preferences on how honest they are, sugarcoat things, how they make decisions, when they make decisions, and every doctor I've talked to has like war stories about the time they tried to be honest and compassionate with a patient and it blew up in their face because that person wasn't ready for it. They didn't have the coping skills or whatever. And for fear of wanting to doctors don't want to traumatize their patients. I mean, most doctors don't want to traumatize their patients. And so they kind of do this dance. We're kind of waiting on the patient to signal when they want to talk about things. Uh, Whereas on the other side of the things, most patients are waiting on their doctor to signal when they need to talk about things. And we get in this weird dance where everyone's thinking about the same stuff usually, but no one's saying it. So the whole point of my platform is to give patients the information they need to feel empowered to have the conversation they need to have on their timeline so they can feel as much as possible like they're in the driver's seat for their own healthcare.
And I saw on your website you have a download for a goals of care conversation starter. And
Yeah.
what's that like?
So the jump starter kind of speaks to kind of the thought beyond what I just said, you know, telling patients to start a high stakes serious conversation with the doctors. It's a big ask, and I've received pushback on this too, validly so. Some people say, "Are you kidding me? I'm supposed to have this conversation with my doctor? Like that's the doctor's job." And I mean, yeah, that is true. But some people very much want to, you know, get behind the wheel of the car and start the conversation. They just don't know how to do that. And so the jump starter is this little one-page PDF guide that gives you like the literal words you can say. It's like 4 prompts. It says, "Hey doc, I want to talk about a few things." It basically outlines uh, the basic verbal cues for what we call goals of care conversation in healthcare. Just my understanding of illness, you know, how I want to do things differently if things got worse, who I'd like to have be part of this conversation in the future, when do we need to revisit this conversation. Just the very bread and butter basics that, if nothing else, signal to your doctor that these conversations are important to you, that you want to have goals based conversations as you make decisions now and in the future. It's just a very helpful signal to your doctor about the kind of person you are and how you like to communicate.
And there are definitely doctors out there who would be interested in having the conversation, but they might
Yeah.
be waiting for that kind of signal or just something to click and remind them, oh, this is the right time for that. This is what they're ready for.
Yeah. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts, most doctors are open to these conversations and want to have them, but also don't want to scare their patients, traumatize their patients. They're thinking of the one time they tried to do this and it went horribly, and they're kind of waiting for the signal that it's time to talk about these things. And this is the way to give them that signal.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and I think it's nice for patients to have that reassurance, that piece of paper to kind of clue them in on what to say or how to say it and how to bring up the conversation so that we get past that stalemate of each side waiting for someone else to say something.
Exactly, exactly right.
So that's really helpful, and that's on your website. And then I'm really curious about how you ended up on social media because I see that as something else very helpful that you're doing out there, and I want to hear about that journey also.
Yeah. So the social media journey that has been a journey, an experiment, and it's been eye-opening for sure. So this all started about 2 years ago and some months now. It's been long enough that I'm losing track of the timeline now. But a couple of years ago, I wanted to do something about a few things that I kept seeing in clinical practice. One, we touched on already, which was this pervasive misunderstanding of palliative medicine and the I will say well-intentioned gatekeeping there was from other physicians, gatekeeping access to palliative care services for their patients because they thought it wasn't time yet or whatever other misconception. Um, that got frustrating, and I wanted to put more palliative content out there so people could see for themselves what palliative care was, what it wasn't, how to get access to it. But the other thing I wanted to address with the platform was this other common scenario where I see daily, if not weekly, at the bedside, where I'd have my visit with the family and the patient. We'd go through our usual stuff, the symptom management, the goals, and as I do at the end of every conversation, I'd ask, well, hey, what questions do you have? And the most common response I would get would be, I don't even know what I should be asking right now.
Hmm.
Because just so many people, people aren't medically trained. These are very complex situations that I get involved with. So how would you know what to ask? And I thought, that's a good point. I wondered, well, what could we do to change that? How could we get people information to make them just a little savvy or a little bit more empowered to help them understand what resources are out there, what sorts of questions do docs respond to and how, so that way they could, have a better sense of what to ask and when to ask it. So that was the motivation to start this video-based platform where I just started tackling the answers to questions I would get at the bedside about what is palliative care? How does it differ from hospice care? When should I be approaching my doctor to talk about these services? How do I how do I put on a fentanyl patch? How do I manage nausea if I can't swallow pills? Just everything under the sun related to the stressors and symptoms of a serious illness. I wanted to build this library of resources where people could go to, and when my hope, my dream was that when people were Googling questions in the middle of the night rather than finding some quackery online,
Yeah.
they'd find my platform, they'd find reliable information they could use to bring to their next clinic visit.
And you started on YouTube?
I started on YouTube making longer videos. They were pretty bad. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was filming on my laptop's camera, which had the image resolution of a potato. I didn't know anything about editing, but we had to start somewhere. The difficulty was I work full time. I have a 4 and 6 year old who occupy most of my time outside of work. And it was very challenging to try to script a 4, 5, 6 minute video and then edit it and go through the process of uploading it to YouTube. But what I did have a lot more flexibility for where 30, 60 minute and a half little random thoughts I'd have in the car, which happens to be the only quiet place in my entire life because home is not quiet, work is not quiet. But that a couple of minutes in the driveway, very quiet, and turns out is a great recording studio. The acoustics are perfect. And in between these longer videos, I would just record a random thought about hospice care, palliative care, just the things that really do just sort of keep me up and bug me. Um, and I would post those in between my long form YouTube videos. And one day I was getting coffee with a friend and telling her about YouTube stuff and the struggles that I was having getting traction. And she saw the shorter videos and said, "You know what? You should put those on Instagram." And I said, "I mean, like, why? Like, I'm already doing YouTube. I really don't want to do more." But she's like, "Yeah, I just think they would do better there." And luckily, I trusted her instincts there and started uploading my shorter stuff to Instagram. And one in particular where I talked about the reframe of hospice care and uh, my frustrations with the presumption that people in hospice care want to die. My reframe that hospice was about people who want to live, but to do so on their own terms. Um, that one took off. YouTube and people on YouTube did not care about that one, but 500,000 people on Instagram did care about that one. And overnight, I got thousands of followers on Instagram and decided, okay, I guess this is where I'm going to hang out.
This is the place.
Yeah, and so like we say in palliative care, we meet people where they're at, and people were telling me that they were on Instagram. They like the shorter content, and so I leaned into that, and my focus by and large has been little half a minute to minute and a half blurbs in the car, in between work and home, and it's been uh, it's been a lot of fun
But
experimenting with how to craft complex messages in a straightforward, bite-sized way.
yeah, and they're so helpful. They're just little pearls of information, so succinct, but it comes across really clearly, and they're also memorable in some way, so it sticks with you. Like, oh, like that's a really good point, and I really commend you because you've mastered it. It appears to me you're doing a great job with creating those, and you also answered for me why so many people record in their cars because I've always been curious about that, but now it makes sense because of the acoustics, it's quiet in
Yeah,
there, and probably we're also always on the go a lot, and it's the one time when you have your own little bubble and your own safe little world to yourself to record.
absolutely. And I'm glad to hear that they resonate because I don't feel like I've mastered it. It feels like an ongoing education and work in progress. So I'm glad the messages are landing.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that there are different audiences on every social media platform. And so it's like you never know what the reception will be in each place. But when something hits like that, it's obviously a sign that this is something that's been needed. You've filled a need that people have for the
Yeah,
content, and that's why they're tuning in. And somehow I know the algorithm started showing me your videos, and I've really enjoyed them and just enjoyed listening to you and your style and how thoughtful you are and just also how tuned in I think to what people really need to hear.
thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah, I can see why you're successful, and I want to kind of channel more people to your Instagram feed, but also people on YouTube who may want to go back and revisit some of those videos that you've posted before. Are you still doing YouTube content or is it just Instagram?
I try to cross post as often as possible. So if someone is following me on YouTube, they'll see most of the stuff I post on Instagram, with the exception of I enjoy doing collaborative videos where I'll partner with someone else in a specialty like child life or nursing or speech therapy. And for those folks, if they're also on YouTube, I'll post that there. But if they're just on Instagram, I tend to just keep to wherever they're there and their followers are hanging out.
And what else do you have available on your website? Do you have any of the videos there if someone went to your website?
So the website will link you to the Instagram and the YouTube channels. Some of the videos I have tried to transcribe into blog post forms, so you can get um, some of that content through the website itself, if reading is more your style. As you mentioned, the conversation jumpstarter is there, which is just a free little download you can get there. And there's also I have some expanded thoughts on how to use that guide that's on the webpage um, as well as just links to other interviews I've done, and my contact information if you ever want to reach out to me and work one-on-one or anything like that. You can find it all there on the website.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering about your one-on-one coaching and who that's for and what you offer.
Yeah. So these days, when I'm talking about palliative care to an audience outside of where I live in the Chicagoland area, a common question I'll get from people is like, okay, well, like, how do I get palliative care? And I'll give them that website, type in their zip code, and they'll say, oh, no, I've already done that. There's no one here. Like, how can I get more support right now? And it felt crummy to say like, well, I guess you're out of luck. So I have I now offer one-on-one what I call them coaching services because it's not the strict practice of medicine unless you're in Illinois and want to set something up. But I wanted to offer some mechanism to provide support to people, whether you're the one living with a serious illness or taking care of someone. Want to provide a sounding board if ever you're trying to decide, should I be thinking about a transition to hospice, or how do I how do I make decisions right now? How do I prioritize things? How do I get a straight answer out of my doctor about whether this clinical trial makes sense? I wanted to offer some mechanism for people to get a little bit more help that way. So I do offer private one-on-one coaching support for folks who don't have local access to palliative care, but need something to help them through a tough decision.
That's really nice because I know palliative care availability is it's not consistent across our country for sure, and so many
Right.
rural areas don't have it at all. And so that's really meeting a need and fulfilling a service for people. So I commend you for that. But have you ever thought of coaching physicians either about palliative care or
Yeah.
but also how to communicate better with patients?
Yeah. This would be a great time to shout out Vital Talk, which is a nonprofit organization that provides a framework to teach clinicians of all disciplines how to navigate high stakes decisions for patients living with a serious illness. It was Vital Talk was part of my fellowship training. I'm a faculty member with the Vital Talk community now. I get no compensation whatsoever for plugging them. I love the program and will sing their praises whenever I get a chance. So at my hospital and in our region, we have been teaching the Vital Talk framework to our medical trainees for some years now. And for folks looking for formal communication skills training, I always point them towards Vital Talk. We have a lot of different classes, asynchronous and live and all sorts of stuff. I think it's a wonderful resource.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad you shared that. I'm going to put it in the show notes.
100%.
Because
Yeah,
I,
I love
I've
praising Vital
honestly
Talk.
I've had people email me after episodes like this and say, I went to my doctor right away and told him what I learned on your podcast. So I'm and gave them a recommendation for something they need to read or they need to learn. So who knows? There are people out there may be spreading that information about Vital Talk to their physician. So is it vitaltalk.org or
Correct. Yep.
.org? Okay.
Yeah.
I need to write it down so I remember to look it up and include it. But that's fantastic.
Yeah, I owe a lot to them. They were the backbone of my palliative care training, and yeah, they're out there. Look them up. They've got a lot of great offerings these days.
Yeah, that's great to learn about. Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing with me your journey and everything you're doing. And I'll be seeing a lot more of you. How often do you post on Instagram?
Uh, I try to get something out there at least once a week. I aim for like 1 to 3 times per week. It depends on the complexity of the topic and how what's going on in my work and family life at any given moment. Not much time I get in the car.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I'll keep watching, and I hope a lot of the listeners will check it out too, because they're really great pearls, and people could be sharing them with other people that they know might need the information.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And if you're listening, shoot me a message on Instagram. Let me know that you heard me here. And yeah,
Yeah.
always happy to chat more.
All right. Fantastic. Well, yeah, let's stay in touch, and maybe we'll catch up next year and hear what's happening down the road.
Uh,
So thanks again.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Matt Tyler about how to train your doctor. And be sure and tell other people about it if you think they'd like to listen in. I'll see you next time with another new interview for you. Until then, take care.